Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another episode of the Coaching Outdoors podcast. And we are in series 9, which is super exciting. I am Anna Marie and I'm flying solo today. Doesn't always happen, but sometimes work life crops up and it is what it is. Alex and Paul are unfortunately unable to join us. So I am taking the seat with Sam. And I am super excited to have Sam on board. I have wanted to have a conversation with her for a while. I've been tracking her work for the last 3-4 years when I first went on one of her courses, and I'm now deeply immersed in another one of her programs, which we'll be dipping into later. Enough from me. Sam, briefly introduce yourself.
Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So I'm Sam MacLaren. I'm 57 and a half. I'm wildly neurodivergent, and I'm also a practicing animist in the British and Irish traditions. I'm an academic, a writer, and a teacher. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam. And to anyone listening in, we love to throw someone a little bit different into each series. You know, traditionally we interview coaches from around the world, showcase their world. And we very much feel that if you just remain within the coaching world, then how do you actually grow? How do you actually look beyond and seek knowledge and skills and wisdom from other disciplines? So Sam is very much an outsider and yes, guide, seer, coach. I think it all gets a little bit blurry and a little bit messy at times. So, kickstarting with our normal question, and this is a classic that we have asked on every single podcast going back to the year dot. What is your earliest memory of being outdoors? And it is a two-parter. And why do you love nature so much?
Right. Okay. My earliest memory, God, we're going back a bit. Okay. So my very earliest memory that I think is being about maybe 3 years old. And I just knew that I wanted to be out in the garden all the time. And one of the things was that I used to love turning over stones and looking at all the beasties underneath. And apparently, I used to be very keen on digging up worms and on the odd occasion eating them. That's not something I like to dwell on, if I'm honest. But yeah, so why do I love nature? Well, apart from some aspects of it being apparently delicious to a toddler, I found the natural world really, really comforting and friendly. And I would say that my dad was the one who really encouraged my love of nature, because he would take me out every weekend and we'd go looking for frogs and toads and newts, or we'd go cold water swimming in Scotland, or rock pooling up there, or on the East Yorkshire coast. And because we were always out in it. And he was the one that taught me the names of the trees and some of our native healing plants and their medicine. And he and his mother, my grandma, taught me about the importance of being kind to animals, and especially helping the wild animals through winter by putting out food for them. So, and I think also I was quite a lonely child, and I think quite likely due to my then undiagnosed ADHD, which made it really difficult for me to sustain friendships, because I was a bit weird, not going to lie. So the beings of the natural world became my friends, and I have very clear memories of sitting under the fruit trees in my garden and talking to them, or talking to the rose bushes, and even to like the wood lice under the rocks. And it all felt completely normal to me to do that. And I would rather spend a day outside than anywhere else. And I didn't realize it then, but I was constantly grounding myself, because I hated wearing shoes, absolutely hated wearing shoes outside. So this was, I think, helping to regulate my system and reduced my ADHD symptoms. So on overall, I just felt much more at peace in myself in nature, and as if I was surrounded by friends.
Hmm. I think that's the first time we've had anyone talk about eating living beasties.
Yeah, it horrifies me to even think about
No,
it, but
no, but it is. It's that knowing, and actually, what our response is when we're that age is to put it in our mouth to test it out.
yeah.
Um, and I've listened to people answer this question. We've had, I don't know, 80 people, and it's been really intriguing listening to the patterns that come through. And yes, the garden is that's what surrounds our home, so that is very often the first memory, and then the connection to the caregiver, whether it is a parent, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's an aunt, and actually how their experience and lived world and lived experience and their beliefs, how that then has an impact, and then where you
Yeah.
go from that. But I love the idea that at that age you were being taught the tree names, which it's our inherent right, and something now. I don't know the exact stats, but I don't think if you asked a child living in England now to name 5 native trees, it's an unknown.
Yeah,
And 5 cartoon characters, it would be off the cuff. So this is our lost heritage. Um,
absolutely.
so
It's so
part,
sad.
yeah, it's just destroying. Um, so skirting around to your work, and part of the reason I've been so attracted to your work is because of the academic rigor that you have
Mhm.
invested in it. And this is something within the podcast we really want to remain true to is, okay, what is the research? What does the academic um, science tell us? Because it's having that basis, like what is the why? And yes, a part of it is satisfying that part of our brain that wants the kind of the rational and the logical and the proof. And then it goes into this piece around the answer. What's the application? What does it actually mean to our practice, and how can we apply this and bring this into our work and into our lives? So for you, I know that you are an absolute geek when it comes to the research.
Yes.
um, and you're so rigorous, and I know that you've done so much. So just maybe top line, who or what has influenced your work? And I'm very aware that it's still ongoing.
I think, well, initially, I was a lot of neo-pagan writers. So before I went to university and had all of that education, I was very influenced by neo-pagan writers, which obviously I don't actually have read these books anymore. But they sort of, I'm grateful to them for putting me on a path. But in terms of academia, I think the person that really influences me would be people like Professor Ronald Hutton, because he's very well known. I mean, he's a practicing pagan. I think he's a neo druid, but he's also very good at teasing apart the whole sort of pre-Christian pagan fact from fiction in our British and Irish sort of mythology and history. So I really like his books. And then another person that was really strong influence was my first sort of academic teacher in this. So before I went to university, it was Harvard Celtic scholar Sharon Pace MacLeod. Because I did one-to-one work with her, and she obviously dispelled a lot of the crap that circulates out there around our heritage and mystical traditions, and also the work of Professor Graham Harvey, who is kind of an authority on animism. And then more recently, scholars like Emma Wilby and Frances Young for their work on Britain and Ireland's supernatural origins, and Emma Wilby's deep dive into the idea of seership and second sight. So those are the people that are really influencing me, past and present.
And I really want to bring this into context for our listeners and why I feel that this is so important. At the moment, across the world, I see that there is this almost like cultural misappropriation of whether you're adopting other cultures' indigenous practices for spiritual meaning to provide that to yourself. And it's almost within
Mm-hmm.
the West, there's this void, there's this gap that Christianity for some does not fill. And actually
Absolutely.
nature and the connection to nature, I believe that people are being drawn back to that again and again. And whether we look at, we've had COVID, people are stepping outside more, whether there is this just gap, this mental health challenge, and which is endemic across the Western societies, so that there is something missing. So whether this connection to nature and our connection to nature, how do we make sense of that? And actually it's from a deeper spiritual level. And I know that for me, and I can only talk for myself here, that being from England, from these lands, there is a real desire to know, well, what is my heritage, as opposed to taking practices adopted from another land and imposing them within our landscape. So this is why I was really drawn to Sam and her work, to really travel back into the annals of time and to understand, like, how did our ancestors be with nature, because ultimately we are a part of nature. And anyone who's listening in, just really think about your past and your heritage and your ancestors and your connection to land, because this is taking it at a deeper level. And ultimately our relationship with nature and our beliefs, that then feeds back into our life and into our work. So I just really want to set that in context. And then the people who've influenced our work and the reading and the research that you do, they're the trailblazers. And then it's how you take that knowledge and integrate it into your life. And
Mm.
and it's also inherently personal. So that idea of like a spiritual awakening and that realization, when you're opening yourself up and noticing, it will come. And Sam, I'm really interested in a couple of significant spiritual awakenings that you've had in your lifetime. One when you were 7, and then in 2019 when you were diagnosed with breast cancer. And would love to have an insight into those experiences, if you're willing to share. And then how has that shaped your spiritual development?
Yes, of course. So the awakening experience as a child, in and of itself, may not sound like much, but to me it was extremely profound, because it was the catalyst. It was the thing that set me off on this spiritual trajectory. So when I was 7 years old, I remember I was in the bathroom, and I remember this as clear as if it was yesterday, because out of nowhere a voice in my head said clearly and loudly, "The universe is a hologram. Look beyond what your eyes can see." That was it. That was the big experience. But at 7 years old, I had absolutely no concept, no idea of what a hologram was. And I went and asked my father, because he was very scientifically minded, and he tried, I remember he tried really hard to explain it. But at that age, I just really struggled to grasp any of it. So I remember his face when he asked me why I wanted to know. And the only thing I could say was, "God told me." And because God at that age was the only frame of reference that I had for random voices in my head. I now sort of recognize that it was, possibly one of my lifelong spiritual guides, or my higher consciousness, or whatever. And it might have been the creator, but I feel like that energy has a lot more to do than worry about putting weird thoughts into little girls' heads. Who knows? But what I do know is that that statement kind of followed me my whole life, and it is really fascinating to me now to hear modern theoretical physicists saying those very words, that the reality we experience isn't anything like we think it is. And then on the back of that experience, I then found myself really drawn, strongly drawn, and I mean like obsessively drawn to a book, simply because of the cover. And the book was by an author called Susan Cooper, and it was called The Dark is Rising. And the cover showed a man on horseback, but instead of a human face, he had the face of an owl and deer antlers coming from it. And I begged for this book, and I had no idea what it was about. There was just something about that image on that I needed the book. And it turns out it was a story that was very much weaved around British pagan folklore. And I remember just being utterly engrossed in it. And I recently listened to the adaptation of it on BBC Sounds, and obviously I could see why I was so drawn to it then. So those two experiences, like I say, maybe not a big deal, but they were the catalyst for projecting me, if you like, down this path. And I think when I got to sort of about 16 years old, that's when it really all kind of exploded, and I started looking at the various sort of pagan paths that were available at the time. And the rest is history, as they say. So then we fast forward 45 years, and I got my cancer diagnosis, which was definitely a huge awakening experience. And one of the things that I say that really surprises people is that getting cancer was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It might sound crazy, but that experience brought me into direct contact with the other world and my own innate power to heal myself through receiving the guidance through direct revelation, because I received sign after sign. I remember I worked with active cannabis oil, so the THC stuff, and went on one of the deepest healing journeys of my whole life. And the plant directed me to connect with the tumor itself, ask it directly why it was there, what it needed to heal, and how to facilitate that. And I was in the trance space in that journey for probably about 2 hours, and yet I remember it all clearly. So here is the challenging part. Here was that the spiritual guidance I received told me to refuse the chemotherapy that they were going to offer, and to not take the estrogen suppressant medication that they gave me, because the guides said these things would actually do me more harm than good, and especially as my cancer was removed by surgery and there was nothing in the lymph nodes, so it hadn't circulated throughout the body. So the spirit told me that that the cancer wouldn't come back because I'd done the necessary healing work, and so it was interesting to hear that corroborated by an oncologist, that they had gene tested the tumor to determine the likelihood of it coming back after 5 years and then after 10 years. And I told that the overall score was 9%. So apparently I had the same risk of recurrence as somebody getting cancer who'd never had it. And my oncologist had told me I was cured. Mm. So that was a huge lesson in trust and surrender, because to refuse the chemo that they wanted to give me and not take the meds was a massive challenge, because as anybody knows who's been through that, the language spoken around cancer is catastrophic. It's terrifying. And I was frightened that I was actually playing with my life. But my spiritual guidance kept repeating that I was safe over and over and over. So I decided to trust them. And I do want to add a caveat that this is my personal experience. I'm not advocating anybody refuse treatment, but this just for me, it was always like kind of testing them. So they say if cancer's going to come back, it's usually within the first 5 years. And last September was the 5-year mark, and my mammogram was all clear. So just to sum up, the whole experience showed me, the realities and the dimensions that I currently work with, and I trust them implicitly because their guidance helped me navigate it was the most challenging experience of my life. And I do feel that on some level it was a kind of initiation experience that brought me into a very deep relationship with the other.
Wow. And really curious to anyone who's listening in, what is going on for you right now, and what are you noticing within yourself, and whether there's any experiences where you have had that like deep intuitive knowing or received messages, and what has transpired. And as ever, we're always curious to know. Part of this podcast is all about connection and sharing the stories and sharing experiences, because that is what helps us learn and grow and collaborate and connect with each other. And it's also, particularly when you're moving into a more spiritual way of being, hearing these stories, it can be reassuring, because the rational mind can just be like, this is insane, like this cannot be true, because it is beyond our states of consciousness that have been
Mm.
conditioned within the Western culture and society that we live. And I think this is maybe why we are so drawn to other indigenous tribes. There's almost a freedom in it. There's a beyond, there's a stepping into, and whether there is that kind of almost exoticness of it, we can kind of dream and pretend and play. And I want to bring it back to our roots, our land, living here in the British Isles, and just exploring a little bit about that, because there's a lot of unknown untruths, information that has masked the reality. So coming back, the word Brittany, and listening in, this might be a new word to you. You might never have heard it before. So welcome to a new word, which is your heritage. And Sam, take the floor. Tell us about Brittany.
Okay, so yeah, this is the thorny question. So bear with me because it's quite a lengthy response. And I say it's a thorny question because most people still believe that the ancient people of Britain were Celts, but the modern scholarship is rapidly moving away from that theory and instead recognizing the pre-Christian people of this land as a separate identity and culture from the continental Celtic people. So where does the name Brittany come from? Well, in short, it's the name that was used by the earliest Greek ethnographers. So the earliest reference being from Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, so bang smack in the middle of the Iron Age. And he mentioned a people called the Bretonnoi, associated with the inhabitants of Britain. And then fast forwarding 100 years or so, we have Pythias of Massalia, who wrote about the Brittany people in 325 BCE. And then we have Roman writer Avienus, who referred to our larger island as Albion and the smaller island Ierne. So the entire archipelago, he said, was called Britannica. So the Roman historian Diodorus Siculus also mentions the Brittany people in his writings. And what we see is that over time, with the coming of the Romans to Britain, the name Britannica was Latinized to Britannica, and the Brittany thus became Brittany, and then eventually Britons. So nowhere in these early writings, nor in any of the later Roman writings, Caesar, are the people of Britain ever referred to as Celts. They are always referred to as Britons. And it's interesting because if you look at our indigenous native languages, so the Welsh and Irish Gaelic, Scots Gaelic, there's no original word for Celt because it's a modern loan word. But there are cognates in each of these languages for Brittany. So in Welsh, it's Prydanwr, and in Scots Gaelic, for example, Britnach. So these are all sort of like the evolution of this ancient Brythonic word. And what's even more interesting is that nobody in the British Isles ever referred to themselves as a Celt. And we know this as a fact. Nobody referred to themselves as a Celt until 1707. And in 1707, a Welsh Oxford academic by the name of Edward Lloyd published his Archaeologia Britannica, which categorized ancient British languages as Celtic based on what are now sort of, well, they're considered questionable comparisons to modern Irish, Welsh, and Breton, and certain cognates with Gaulish and other early European languages. And it's also good to remember that in 1707, the Act of Union with Scotland had been ratified. So there was a lot of angry folk were looking for ways to distance themselves from said union and kind of jumped on Lloyd's Celt terminology as a way of creating a separate identity. But the fact is the term was only ever meant to be a linguistic one and not one to describe a native identity and culture. So modern scholars are now, fairly certain that Britannia was actually an insular term, so a collective name by which the various tribes of these islands would have known themselves. So as such, that's why I use it when I connect with the ancient ancestors of these lands. So what does the term actually mean? Well, linguists have come up with two possible meanings. So it means either the painted people, referencing this habit or legend of them tattooing or painting their skin blue with woad. But it also might mean something like supreme landholders. Right, take a breath. There we go.
Ooh, there's a lot in there. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. And if you're listening, you might want to just kind of rewind and go through that all again. What a history lesson. And yeah, who has actually heard of the word Britannia before and who knew that about the Celts? And I just remember being absolutely blown away that the word wasn't in use until 1707 because that is so recent in our past.
It
And
is.
uh, I
I
think
do
for
just
me,
want, sorry, I just wanted to interject very briefly and just say, there's no doubt that a group of people called the Celts existed. We know that they existed, but they were basically housed in sort of areas north of the Rhine and areas of what's now modern France and southern Spain, where we have people like Caesar referring to these people in those areas as Celtae, or in Roman they called it Galli, but he says that in their own language they refer to themselves as Celtae. But whenever any of these authors talk about the people of Britain, it's always Britanni. And even in our early medieval writings, right up until the identity of Welsh became a thing, anybody who was native to Britain was referred to as a Briton, not a Celt. So yeah, sorry, there you go.
no, thank you for interjecting. Very, very much welcome, and makes that distinction and just really illustrates how our history has been shaped by, I mean, some key historians, and then there's been the political element to it as well. And I think it almost comes back to, well, what is reality? And reality is this hologram, and it has been shaped and developed over so many years. And how do we really know what the truth is to us?
Mm.
Yeah, so loving all the research and all the names and how you really go and dig into the detail and then just really like your fact finding and then you're kind of proving like proof of concept again and again and again, like what is the evidence, how does it back it up to really give it that validity. And this is our heritage, and we are influenced so much by the past and the deep deep past. And I think living in the world as we do, which is just so on fast forward and living in a bubble, we kind of forget the roots of our past. And actually, for me, this work and bringing it into my coaching is all about like a deeper remembering and that ability to stop, which in this world is in itself, when there's so much distraction going on, is really, really hard. And actually to land and tune into a different part of myself. And with the being able to do that, that for me is then how am I shifting? How am I showing up differently? You know, yes, within my coaching work, but also within how I move through my day-to-day life and connect with, yes, human form, but also other form beings as well, of which there are many and are ignored. So coming around to these myths and the Celts that pervade, and I know that there are many. So I've asked you to think about maybe the top three. um, what are the top three myths that you would like to dispel about these newer Celtic or neo-pagan beliefs or rituals? And I get this might be a little bit contentious for some people to listen into.
So this is how I make myself pretty unpopular in neo-pagan circles. But here we go. So there are three really big ones that I want to highlight today that are circulated as ancient Celtic beliefs, and they are very, very popular ideas. But unfortunately, they are all the product of mid 20th century pagan revival movements. So the first is the Celtic tree zodiac, or the Celtic tree calendar. So this is a new age fabrication. Sorry. It's based around the Ogham system of divination, which in itself is also highly problematic and a modern invention arising from the same source that I'm about to divulge. But basically, this calendar, this tree calendar, assigns specific trees to specific lunar months, but it really has no basis in any fact. So during the 20th century pagan revivals, the tree calendar was embraced and adapted from a work by Robert Graves called The White Goddess. And this book purported to be a spiritual pre-Christian history of the British Isles and Ireland. So as it turned out, it was a lot of nonsense. And interestingly, Graves even admitted on his deathbed that he made it up, stating that he saw it as a work of poetic beauty and not factual scholarship. And most people aren't even aware of that. And a lot of people look to the White Goddess as literally the sacred text of the history, spiritual history of the British Isles. But regardless, this was eagerly embraced by Wiccan and modern Druid movements. But because it remained unchallenged in these circles, if you like, it's persisted and has unfortunately become a foundational belief, and one that we erroneously think of as being extremely ancient. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is this idea of the four elements and their elemental and their placements. So and this is usually quite a surprise to many people. So the four elements model commonly used by neo-pagan groups of earth, air, fire, and water as being ancient Celtic is actually an ancient Greek philosophical model. And we don't have any evidence that it formed part of a native Prytani belief system. But what is more likely is a possible belief in a total of 9 elements, especially if we look at elements in the broader sense of as being parts of a whole. This 9-element system appears across the board in early Indo-European societies. So we're talking maybe between 8 and 5,000 BCE. Now we have a single shred of evidence from early Welsh poetry. It's a poem called The Battle of the Trees, attributed to the poet Taliesin. And this single line states, "Of the 9 elements I am composed." So not 4, but 9. So no doubt you'd like to know what they are. So these 9 elements are rock, earth, plants, water, wind, cloud, sun, moon, and sky. And what's especially interesting is that in traditions where writing had been perfected 5,000 years ago, such as India, these 9 elements that are essential for life on Earth to thrive are also given equivalents within the human body. So rock are the bones, the earth is flesh, the plants are hair, the water is our body fluids, the wind is the breath, the clouds are emotions, the sun is the right eye, the moon, the left eye, and the sky is the mind. So that we have this, in that we have this powerful indication of animistic thought and belief that we are the earth itself and part of the living systems of the universe. And I have a really, I teach a really powerful meditation on this, and every time I do it, it's like it literally makes me become the planet herself. It's astonishing. So the third one that I want to look at is Ogham divination, as I just mentioned. So Ogham divination is again another one of Graves's inventions, unfortunately, highlighted in the White Goddess book that I outlined just now. So Ogham was actually an early system of writing, so an early medieval system of writing, which arose between sort of like the 4th and 6th centuries, and it was used for marking names, territory, and burial sites. So as part of his Celtic tree calendar associations, Graves assigned mystical meanings to the Ogham symbols and with them and connecting each one to a tree. And in reality, only a few of the Ogham symbols actually relate to trees at all. So most of it is a fabrication. And we know that the Ogham system of writing, it just wasn't intended for use as a divination system. Anybody interested in looking at that, Damien McManus is your man for sorting fact from fiction. He is a scholar of the Ogham system, and his is quite heavy going, but it's very interesting to see what each Ogham symbol actually represents, as opposed to what Robert Graves said it represents. Another caveat I just want to add there, for anybody who uses the Ogham system, I'm not telling you not to do that, because with any kind of oracle, it's the intention that we give it that makes it work. So if you're using it, carry on, but just I think it's important, as with these other two myths that I've highlighted, it's really important to know the origins of the stuff that we're doing. So it's like I'm not telling people not to use them, but it's important to know their origins.
And really, really want to echo that as well. Personal, spiritual practices, ritual, ceremony. There is a dearth, a lack of it within our Western culture.
Yes. Yeah.
Of capitalism, where our shopping malls are our churches, and actually how you bring connection into your life and what you choose is completely up to you. and
Yes.
then how you might bring tendrils of that into your practice. And again, working as a coach, which predominantly our audience is, how you hold your beliefs in in connection with your client, and actually how is it person-centered, you're following the client's agenda and their beliefs and their values, and then how do you remain authentic and true to yourself, and actually where could an element of invitation come into the coaching work and conversations that you're having together as well.
Mm.
And whether you're working with kind of meditation or mindfulness, maybe you're bringing the elements into your practice and using that as a metaphor, as a tool, and actually the four elements that might work for you, that might be something that you've doing for years, and there is the invitation to step towards the nine elements and what richness could that bring. And for me, thinking about the nine elements, and when we're thinking about the wider ecosystem and nature, it's so much more inclusive. It's so much more
Mm.
interconnected. It weaves everything together. And for me, I love this idea of systems, individuals. We are part of the system. The system lives within us. It's so amorphous that
Yes.
we can't escape it. We're trapped within it, and that in itself within
Mm.
coaching can bring conversations around how do you position, how do you show up, how do you explore. So I think for me within my coaching work and just from a personal practice, it is this idea of intentionality and ritual as well. As human beings, we are starved of ritual, and when we look around indigenous cultures, there is ritual at the heart of it. So
Yes.
again, this is my personal experience of bringing the ritual in, actually the awe and wonder that brings into my everyday life. And again, when we're working with our coaching clients, this idea of awe and wonder, that links back to attention restoration theory. Actually, within coaching, we're wanting to create change moving forwards, and actually having this awe and wonder and being present, that is what is feeding us, feeding the soul to ultimately be a part of something bigger and letting the work kind of flow through us. So, Sam, your work, clearly you've done all this research into like dispelling myths and like, nope. Okay, so let's bring it back to like take us back. Like what are the threads back into the annals of history, and what tendrils have you teased going back into, I don't know, different archaeological records, different texts, making comparisons with current day tribes, and then you have created the medicine of the four directions. So please talk us through the origins, like what it involves. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the four directional model that I use as the basis of my work comes from an early medieval Irish myth called the settling of the manor at Tara. So in the myth, a circular cosmology is described, which is really, when I read it, it's very reminiscent of the Native American medicine wheels circulating today. However, rather than four elements being assigned to the directions, which is interesting, so no earth, air, fire, water, instead certain attributes were placed there. And those attributes in brief are knowledge in the west, battle in the north, prosperity in the east, music in the south, and sovereignty in the center. So I have been working with this model for over 10 years now on experimenting with it essentially as part of a personal healing system. And I have to say, it has proven to be the most powerful tool for healing and self-mastery and organizing my life that I have ever encountered. And I've done a lot of work with a lot of Indigenous people and used their wheels, their methods, but this has come out as a clear winner. And I can only assume that it is in some way connected to my ancestral genetic memory. And that is why it speaks so loudly to me. I have to say, my students are currently working with it, as you know, Anna, and really, really feeling the power of it. So the 2-day workshop that I now teach is an introduction to that cosmology, to that wheel, and an experiential exploration of the attributes of each direction as I've come to understand them over the last 10 years, and how they apply to a modern 21st century existence. And one of the things that's really come out of this is that I have been repeatedly astonished at how current the wisdom is, despite being at least 1,500 years old. And it may be older than that. The wisdom might even represent a pre-Christian cosmological map. But when you actually engage with it, it fits and slots in beautifully to my modern 21st century existence. Absolutely incredible.
Thank you. And, you know, this idea of the medicine wheel and looking to other shores, you know, I have had conversations on this podcast with a couple of other coaches that I just want to shout out. So if you're interested to kind of make the connection and dive into that, definitely go back and check out Christiane Frühschmutz, who's an amazing German lady working in that, and then Tom Goldstein as well. And for them, there's definitely a piece around visioning, there's a bit around journeying. So just wanted to kind of signpost their work, just so go and listen and ultimately make up your own mind. And, you know, how do you want to take this? How do you want that to impact you? And then what tendrils can you draw into your coaching practice? And, you know, I will very much hands up. I went through Sam's program back in, I think it was October 22. And went to the Warren, which is a beautiful woodland just west of Somerset, and sat with the wheel for the first time. And it was the first time that I've really stepped towards visioning. You know, for me, meditation visioning, I've kind of struggled with it before, you know, whether that's through different cacao ceremonies, and this landed in a different way. And it's very kind of crept slowly into my work. You know, it was then a couple of years since I then have taken it further. So just if this is something that you are curious about, Sam does run these workshops. So check out her work, and we'll clearly be signposting later where you can reach out and get in touch. So yeah, then Sam, next level, Path of the Wheat. We'll start. Okay, so firstly, there's another word here that potentially our audience have not come across. I knew that I hadn't. So when you see the written form and then how you say it, again, it's completely different. But we'll start off with, firstly, who or what is the wheat?
So yeah, in British mythology, wheat means, well, in Welsh language, it means wild or mad. Okay, and it was a figure in our mythology who became essentially wild or insane and received prophetic abilities after experience extreme trauma. And these figures were often associated with nature and madness and that liminality between human and otherworldly realms. So in these stories, these people were driven into the forest to live as ragged hermits, essentially. And their madness was really more akin to divine inspiration and otherworldly spiritual contact than any kind of mental illness. Because through their exile, they gained mystical knowledge, very frequently delivering poetry, prophecy. In their exile, they lived among animals and trees and developed the ability to communicate with them. And what's interesting is that this figure appears in British and Irish mythology in different ways, but as the same character. So in the Welsh legend, we have the character called Myrddin Wyllt, and this character was the basis for Geoffrey of Monmouth's creation of Merlin the Wizard and his Arthurian legend. So Myrddin, after witnessing the horrors of battle, fled into the Caledonian forest in Scotland. And in that, he gained wisdom and foresight. And then we have the Scottish variation of Merddin, who's called Lailoken. And he's also described as a wild prophet who fled into the Caledonian forest after witnessing the horrors of battle. And recent scholarship has actually determined that Lailoken and Merddin were actually the same character. And later on in the Irish, we have a character called Srine Gelt. So he was an Irish king who was cursed to wander the wilderness in a frenzied state after, again, witnessing the horrors of battle. And in his story, he sprouted feathers out of his skin and gained the ability to fly or shapeshift into a bird. And he could talk to trees and, again, deliver prophecy. So these figures reflect themes of madness, if you like, as spiritual vision, the sacredness of wild spaces, and this thin veil between the human and the divine state. So they definitely embody an animistic archetype where the idea of exile from society leads us to deeper truths. So the training course is a year-long training that is an invitation for people to go mad, right? So to cast off the shackles of modern materialism and embark on a journey into their spiritual wilderness. So to be introduced and work with the potent forces and energies that we have been assured do not exist, right? In our modern life, we've been told there's no such thing as these things. But it's a chance for people to learn that indeed they do exist. It's a journey of deep personal healing, direct connection with the spirits of our lands. In part of the journey is for participants to meet their own withed spiritual guide to help them through the processes. And we use this wheel cosmology that I described as the basic framework. So dividing the year up according to seasons and their wisdoms, beginning in the West in August, so around about the harvest time. And through the course, people learn different techniques of seership, whether that's from like fire gazing to shape shifting. They go through various fire ceremonies and initiation experiences, all of which are designed to heal them, to sort of hollow them out, to make them clear channels for the spirits to work with, and to bring them back into harmony and right relationship with the land on which they live. So we've just finished the third weekend, the East of the Wheel, and it was just been amazing, really powerful.
It really is just mind-blowing, and words, our language, fail to really describe the depth of profound change that happens. And I know for me, it's been this real tearing apart of the very foundations that I have built my entire life, and emerging from the north, which was a destruction, it was a battleground, it was harrowing, and now the tendrils of the east are coming through and the energy has shifted, and I have a light optimism of what lies ahead. Yes. And I understand that there's a second year and a third year in the pipeline as well, so we can go around the wheel again. Great. Looking forward to that one. And ultimately linking it back to our listeners, for you, this is deep, profound change. As coaches, we work with change on different levels, and we meet our clients where they are willing to go. And I believe that the depth and the parameters of where we're willing to go depends on the work that we've done on ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
coaches, we are lifelong seekers, we are lifelong learners, and that goes in various different ways. We all have our little getting lost down rabbit warrens and then coming back again and doing another course and more reading and more research. Like, we are avid consumers. And this course, very much, Sam, is so rigorous in satisfying the head, and then it goes deep, 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 deep beyond that. And I am more than willing to have a conversation with anyone who's listening in to share my experiences in more detail. And I know that Sam would be more than happy to connect and have conversations as well.
Sure.
So if this is resonating with you, amazing. If not, and you're like, this is all a little bit beyond, I don't know, the woo woo, like, we are where we are. And ultimately, we're all at different stages. And if you're working with a tool and technique that is working with you, keep going, like, keep bringing that ritual into your practice, and you will be of immense service to your clients. And who knows, maybe 5-10 years down the line, you might be yearning something different. This might just be planting a seed now for something in the future. Who knows? And I think that is the beauty of life, that within our current construct, we are almost like little pre-programmed robots moving through the year, default 24/7, with no appreciation of seasonal shifts and higher states of being. And this is an invitation to reconsider that as to where you are. So, Sam, bringing it back to the coaches and just really bringing it back, because for some people listening in, this will have been a lot, and really want to think about some tangible, practical ways, because this is, okay, what can we do? The and so what? What recommendations, what advice, what experience, from your knowledge and experience, how can we deepen our innate connection to the ancestors and the land, and then bring that back into, how we show up in all that we do?
So that's quite a big question, because, to be honest, it really takes a huge shift in consciousness and the way we view the world to start with, because we have, as a society, been indoctrinated to believe that science and materialism are the only things that matter. They are the only things that actually exist, because science deals in what can be measured. Okay, it's that simple. Science deals with matter and what can be measured. And that Cartesian philosophy killed our innate spirituality 300 years ago, rendering any kind of animistic belief as a childish, laughable fallacy, because spiritual experiences cannot be measured, therefore they don't exist. But spiritual experiences, and I understand that, they can't be measured, they can only be experienced, and therefore materialistic science says that they are, because of that, subject to faulty reasoning. But it's precisely the animistic experience that formed the basis of every pre-Christian culture on earth. Mankind, before the arrival of this sky god, had this innate belief, and it was the world over, right? The entire world, humanity, from the very beginning, had these animistic philosophies informing everything that they did, because these people didn't believe anything. They knew that the earth was alive and sentient. And surviving animistic cultures today haven't changed their opinion. And from my own lived experience, I know that animism is truth. Everything has some form of sentience. It may not be as complex as ours, but there is a kind of consciousness permeating the entire reality, if you like, nonetheless. And one only has to look at the recent research by people like Veda Austin, for example, and Dr. Alex Ling, who have looked into the conscious intelligence of water, and know they pretty much proved that it's a conscious being. And that ties in beautifully with the belief systems of the surviving animistic nations, like the people of New Zealand and Maori. You know, their rivers have been given personhood status because they know that that water is alive. So there's a lot more going on than we have been taught through the materialist worldview. So my advice is to start making a relationship with the land, and that starts with quite literally talking. And don't be afraid of people thinking you're a nutcase. It's like I introduce myself to the land when I go out, especially land I haven't been to, as if I was meeting a new person for the first time. I know it might sound crazy, but that's how we begin to build reciprocal relationships with anything. We introduce ourselves, and it's the same with these ancient land spirits. They need to hear you. They need to know your heart, and especially if you're longing for that deeper connection. You know, it's something that I do all the time, and I get responses. I'm not going to go into that because it's a deeply personal thing. I'm happy to discuss it with people privately, but there are measured responses that happen that defy logic, and I think you could probably attest to that yourself, Anna, in some ways. So as for the ancestors, well, in my cosmological model, the West is the place of the ancestors. So I set up just a small altar in the western part of my home. There's nothing elaborate. I have, a tea light candle there. I have some photos of deceased relatives that's special to me. And it's just a little focal point for my attention. And then I use that place to talk to my ancestors in small but ceremonial ways and tell them that I love them, that I'm grateful for them, grateful for my life. I ask for their guidance and protection and keep the lines of communications open. Other things you can do animistically: talk to your plants. When you go out, talk to spirits, ask for signs that you've been heard, and then see if anything unusual appears. For me, it's always a kingfisher. That's a sign that's become agreed between me and the other. I asked for an unusual bird, and I get one. I get it. So yeah, that's sort of where to start as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. And just almost what's just caught my attention with the ancestors piece, how I know in recent years there's been a real thirst for knowledge around who our ancestors are, and ancestry as as a research tool is something that I've seen people kind of really, really connect with, like online, and having that physical knowledge, and then hearing you talk about the altar, like, well, this is the bringing it to life. It's great to have it and know, and then how do you actually really honor them? And when you look across the world at different cultures, like the shrine is there. When I was traveling in October to Reunion Island to do one of my crazy races, I stayed with a really lovely lady on Airbnb, and her morning ritual was to light the incense and to greet her ancestors. And it grounded her and took her through her day. And it was just really beautiful to see. And just remaining with that trip on the island in Reunion Island, I've been fortunate to race and crazy long ultra running distances. If anyone's not listened in before, it's been a big, 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 big part of my life, and I've traveled and raced all over, and I have moved through so many different landscapes with reverence and still like a stranger, a foreigner. So when I went to Reunion Island, I intentionally went to have a meeting ceremony at a waterfall and took some offerings from my land, and had some time and just sitting, and the birds greeted me, and then the birds carried me throughout my journey, which went through two bird songs in the morning, and it was just so vivid and so loud, and I knew that I was welcome. And it's that shift in consciousness, it's that changing relationship that then changes your lived experience, which it was a different way of being for me, and being in connection. So yeah, I encourage you to step towards this, anyone who's listening in, and and being open and having that conversation. You know, for me, I'm living in Frome. There's a new parkland with some beautiful ancient oaks that I spend time with. And I went for the first time and walked the land and talked out loud. And there's a little bridge I went over and just stood and listened to the water. And then there's a certain tree that I visit and I sit with and I go to, and I honor like the wisdom that this tree will have had. You know, in the last 600 years, it's seen so much. And here's me here for a fleeting blink of an eye, just arrived. Actually, what can I learn from them and be held? And I know that if you've listened into other episodes, you will experience, you know, Jackie Holder, her connection with trees and sitting and being with them. James Canton, you know, his sitting with an oak tree over the course of a year. There is so many different ways this can be taken. So I would very much encourage anyone who's listening in to this to be open, to maybe go back and listen to this episode again, because there's been a lot to take in, and sit with it. And Sam, what resources would you recommend to our community?
Right. So okay, there's a really great podcast series that I listen to, and it's called The Emerald, and it's hosted by a guy called Joshua Schrei, and he has a lot of information on animistic thought and practices, and a lot of sort of ancient history around animism, and it's very well researched, very thorough, and very intelligently done, and I really love it, really love it. And I would also strongly recommend that people find any podcast that is interviewing Vida Austin and or Dr. Alex Ling about the sentience of water, because it's mind-blowing. And then also I actually have a resources page on my website which has recommended reading for people, and I'm going to be updating that shortly because I found more excellent books to showcase.
Oh, thank you for that. I hadn't appreciated that you were a fan of the Emeralds. It is a beautiful, long form, and the way that he weaves the spoken word, music, research is absolutely phenomenal. His life has just been astounding as to
Yes.
what he has experienced and where he has lived, and the exposure to different religions and different cultures. And I will say that his voice as well, it just looks like a lullaby. It lulls me to sleep.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah. How can people find out more about your work and get in touch, Sam?
Okay, yeah. So people can visit my website, which is www.pratani.uk. So there's links to resources there and details of the courses, and a link that people can email me. I also have an Instagram page, Pratani Wisdom Traditions. So it's all one word. Or you can find me personally, if you like, on Facebook under Sam MacLaren, and I am more than happy to engage with people, more than happy to have conversations. So, please feel free to reach out and get in touch.
Thank you, Sam. And we will link your page on the podcast episode page. So feel free to check that out. And, very much follow Sam on Instagram. She has some really insightful posts, and I will just reference one which was about the primroses. So if you're watching, you will notice that I have got primroses behind me, and Sam very much dispels the myth about the snowdrops being the first indigenous plant arrival and sign of spring in the UK, when actually they were not. They were brought over and placed within ornamental gardens and weren't wild until I think it was the 17th century, whereas the primrose is our native English flower. So plant primroses is the message going ahead, and really appreciate their delicate beauty that heralds the end of winter and the beginning glimmers of spring. And do please reach out and get in touch with Sam. As with any of our guests, everyone is always willing to have a conversation and to discuss their work. And that is what I'm always blown away with time and time again, is when people do connect and do have a conversation. And and also at the moment, the collaborations between future guests that are coming through is really, really interesting to see as well. I am going to just signpost, regular listeners coming in, you'll know that we have our event at the Henley Business School, which is in June. It's a 2-day event. And Sam has kindly agreed for me to take some of the elements of her work and bring that into a workshop. So I'm really, really grateful for that, to be able to share that and bring a spiritual dimension to Henley. The program that we've developed very much has such a breadth and depth of coaching, and I felt that this was a missing link. So I'm super grateful to be able to bring that into my coaching work. So Sam, a big thank you for me on that. Whew, what an episode, what a ride. Thank you, dear listener, for taking the time to listen, whether you have been, I know, doing some housework, hopefully maybe out on a walk, driving, whatever it is. And you might want to go back and listen in again and make some notes. There is a lot to be digested. And if you're a first-time listener, welcome. We have an absolute treasure trove going back 8 series worth. It's been over 4 years now that we've been doing this podcast. So do go back. And if you feel that there is someone who we have not had a conversation with, or maybe yourself, do get in touch. We're always looking for new people so that we can have a real diversity across the world of coaches and practitioners who are doing their work in so many different ways. And that is what is so amazing about the outdoor and nature connected coaching world. So other than that, if you have enjoyed it, please do tell somebody, share a post, this really helps with the ripple effect. And we are super grateful that our LinkedIn community now is over 2,000 members. So we are spreading the word. Just to circle back to Henley, that tickets are on sale at the moment. It is a 2-day outdoor festival, which there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes at the moment. I have a call later today to finalize some more details with Paul and the team at Henley, which is really, really exciting. So other than that, Sam, a massive, big, heartfelt thank you for coming on and bringing this topic to our listeners. It's a little bit different, maybe a little bit hard to listen to for some people. Others of you might have just absolutely been waiting to listen into it, and you're listening to it at just the right time, because that's the way that the universe works. So enjoy your day, and any comments, any thoughts, let us know. We love to know your feedback. Thank you.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network,
and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.